Most people spend years obsessing over one question: how much is enough to retire? So we did a video called Retire with 6 Million, and that became one of the most popular on our channel. And a lot of people reached out afterward and said, hey, that's me. That's exactly what I needed to see. But it got me thinking, what if you're not at 6 million? What if you have half that? Does life actually look that much different? And after working with hundreds of retirees from $2.5 to $5 million portfolios, I found the better question is this: what really changes once you cross that threshold and what stays exactly the same? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to walk you through two retirement plans, one for a couple with 2.5 million and another for a couple with 5 million. So they have the same lifestyle goals, same blend of pre-tax and brokerage accounts, and they're the same retirement age. And I'm going to show you the real life impact side by side. And my goal is we will answer questions like, what's different between the two? How much more freedom or flexibility does 5 million actually buy? And what's surprisingly similar? So let's start with what you probably want to see first, right? A side-by-side comparison of these two retirement plans. We've got two couples, both are 65, both live in California and both fully retired, and both use the same investment strategy. And the only real difference is one couple has 5 million with 4 million in IRAs and $1 million in brokerage, and the other has 2.5 million with 2 million in IRAs and 500,000 in brokerage. And to keep this apples to apples, we're not including Social Security or pensions, we're just looking at the portfolios. And so we ran both plans using an age-based income path, and that means spending more early on, flatter in the middle, and then a bump later in life to account for rising healthcare costs. Okay, and so right away, what this is doing, this isn't digging into the finer details right now. I want to show you at a high level overview the difference between these two plans. Again, immediately you'll see one plan is for 5 million, another for 2.5. And instantly see that the retirement paycheck, and so because we've simplified this down to just the portfolios, this is just showing, hey, here's what that portfolio could create in terms of monthly income starting now. And you'll see that the retirement paycheck for the $2.5 million plan is roughly half of that of the $5 million plan, right? So no big surprises here. But what's more interesting here is when we start looking at the guardrails, right, those income guardrails for each plan. Now, again, remember, they're invested exactly the same. So if we start with the $2.5 million plan, what we're going to see is that in these guardrails, again, remember, same risk, same everything in both plans. This plan would call for a decrease in monthly income if that portfolio were to decline by about 46%. So that would require about a 1.1, almost $1.2 million drop before this client would have to begin cutting their monthly income. Now, if we look at the $5 million plan, once again, we'll see in their guardrails, they would necessitate a 46% drop before they have to start cutting income. And that dollar amount is about 2.2, almost $2.3 million. So from a risk perspective, in terms of how far the market would need to fall before they change course, the experience is essentially the same. But here's what trips most people up. Percentages don't feel the same in real dollars, right? If your portfolio drops 10% and you have $100,000, that's a $10,000 loss, right? It's not fun, but it's manageable. If you got $1 million and you lose 10%, that's $100,000 gone. It's the same percentage, but it's a very different feeling. So yes, I know I'm stating the obvious, but the bigger the portfolio, the bigger the dollar swings, even when the percentages are identical. And for many high net worth retirees, those swings can really mess with your sense of security. Now, this is usually the point where someone in the comments says, if I had $5 million, I'd just put it on treasuries and collect 4%, and then I'd never worry about money. And I get that. But here's the issue. Most people who've built a $5 million portfolio didn't do it by living on 30% of their income. They've often had high incomes, they paid a lot in taxes, and they've lived with higher expenses for decades. And that just doesn't switch off the moment you retire. So when they step into retirement, it's not about sustaining a number per se, it's about sustaining a lifestyle. And if you want to keep up with inflation, prepare for healthcare, and possibly leave a legacy, that portfolio still needs to grow, which means some risk is necessary. So the big takeaway here is more money increases your capacity, but it doesn't automatically give you more confidence, right? The most confident retirees I've worked with aren't the ones with the biggest balances, they're the ones with the cleanest plans. Because when you understand your income guardrails, when you know how far things can fall before you need to adjust, that's what gives you peace of mind. But there's a specific spot where money starts to create more complexity. One of the biggest surprises when comparing the $2.5 million plan to the $5 million plan isn't investment performance, it's the taxes. But I guarantee you it's not what you'd expect. So if we take a look at the $2.5 million plan, if we follow the basic path of taking from the taxable account first and then the IRA account, we can see that their projected lifetime tax bill is a little bit over $600,000, right? Not small by any means, but relatively manageable, especially when we're talking about a multi-decade retirement. So now if we look at, well, what can they do to improve their scenario, right, for this specific plan? What we can look at is exploring Roth conversions up to the 12%. And what we'll see here is that if they were to follow that strategy, right, creating all the income that we previously discussed, right, which is roughly half than the $5 million plan, what they'd be able to do is create income from their brokerage account like normal, but then they would also be able to convert up to roughly $129,000 in Roth, or from the IRA to the Roth, and that would keep them within that 12% bracket. And what we'll see here is that the plan would be, so these dark purple bars are the Roth conversion amounts. They would plan to convert every single year throughout retirement, actually until 2043. So 2043 is projected to be their last year of Roth conversion. And then after that point, we see these dark blue bars, and that's actually taking income from the Roth IRA accounts, which, as you know, are tax-free withdrawals. So starting in 2044 and beyond, they'll start pulling from that Roth IRA account. They don't have to worry about any taxes. They don't have to worry about IRMA surcharges. But the bottom line is this is the most optimal strategy to keep their lifetime tax bill low, help them avoid Medicare premium surcharges, and create the most optimal income and tax experience. And so all in all, this plan is projected to save them roughly $618,000 in lifetime taxes if they do these strategic Roth conversions. So that was a tax plan for the $2.5 million client. And I'm guessing at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, so if this client with $2.5 million, the optimal strategy for them is to convert up to the 12% bracket. For the $5 million client, because they have larger IRA balances, right, larger future required minimum distributions, right, it would typically make the most sense that maybe they have to convert up to the 22 or the 24% bracket. But that's not necessarily the case. So if we flip over to the $5 million plan, what we're going to see is that if they follow the basic strategy of just taxable brokerage accounts first, then tax-deferred IRA accounts next, their lifetime tax bill is projected to be about $1.9 million. Okay, now we're starting to get into some really big tax numbers over their lifetime. Now, what's very interesting is for their financial plan, right? Not just scaling up Roth conversions for the optimal tax strategy based on your account balance, but based on their specific plan. In fact, the most optimal Roth conversion strategy is to convert up to the first IRMA bracket, which, believe it or not, is lower than the 12% bracket previously as discussed in the $2.5 million plan. We'll see here that their Roth conversion amount in the first year for the $5 million client is $103,000, which is less than the $2.5 million client. So you might be wondering, well, this doesn't make any sense. They should be converting more because they have more of a balance. But again, this was where it comes down to what is the unique tax plan needed for that person based on the balances they have and the income that they need to generate. Because what you'll see on the $5 million client is they have more income coming from long-term capital gains, which doesn't allow them to convert as much to Roth to stay under that first IRMA bracket. Now, what you'll see here is that, again, those dark purple bars are the Roth conversions. So they're going to continue to convert to Roth, but they're going to continue to convert to Roth for a few more years, all the way until 2048, at which point they would stop, and in 2049 and beyond, they wouldn't do any more Roth conversions, but they would start taking RMD income, and that would fully meet their needs. But here's the kicker, even with a less aggressive Roth conversion strategy, they're still projected to save a lot of tax money. So again, if we look at this compared to just the brokerage account first, then pre-tax IRAs, if we do these strategic Roth conversions, even though it's less than the $2.5 million plan, they're projected to save in this strategy over $1.1 million. That's how powerful tax sequencing can be when it's tailored to the actual structure of your income and assets. Now, again, you might be wondering, why not convert more? You're saying that this is the most optimal strategy, but can we prove it? And the answer is yes. So if we look at all the available options, there's a lot in here in terms of what this $5 million client might want to convert. We'll see that if they were to convert up to, let's just say, the 22% bracket, which is probably what you were thinking, right? If the $2.5 million client did 12%, maybe the $5 million client does more. We'll see that at 22%, they still are projected to save some taxes, but it is in fact, they'll pay more taxes filling up to the 22% bracket than filling below the first IRMA bracket. And you'll see it gets even worse if they go higher, like the 24% bracket, the total lifetime tax gets even worse, right? They end up paying more. So this is where it's not just about, oh, you have a higher balance, you must have to convert more. It's what does the income plan call for and what would be the most optimal sequencing? And that's because the tax code doesn't scale with your wealth, right? Two people can be under the same filing status, same brackets, same IRMA thresholds, but when you're dealing with millions of dollars, one misstep doesn't cost you a few $100. It can cost you hundreds of thousands. And so the lesson here is the more you have, the more precision you need. And this is exactly why high net worth retirement planning is so different. It's not just convert early or fill up your brackets. It's about understanding the ripple effects. But even if you got the tax game all figured out, there is a major difference between 2.5 and 5 million that people rarely talk about. See, both couples in our example live in California, so a good portion of their monthly income is naturally going to cover the basics, things like housing, groceries, healthcare, insurance. That part of the plan is pretty straightforward. But here's where the differences show up. For the couple with 2.5 million, those basics account for a good chunk of their monthly spending. They still have some flexibility, but most of what they bring in is going towards living their life. For the 5 million couple, though, those same basic needs are already covered and then some. Their plan shows plenty of extra income, not because they're living frugally, but simply because their assets allow for it. And at first glance, that might seem like a fun problem to solve. And for some people, it is. But for others, it can become surprisingly uncomfortable because at that point, it's not about what you can't afford. It's about what should you do with your money? And that's a harder question to answer. See, I worked with a couple in almost this exact same situation. Their plan was strong. They weren't going to run out of money, but they came to me and said, you know what? We feel like we're not spending enough. We're going to end up dying with too much money. So we adjusted their plan. We added an extra $4,000 per month in for discretionary spending. And again, the plan allowed this for things like extra travel, hobbies, upgrades around the house, things they thought they'd enjoy now that they had the time and resources. But a few months later, they came back and said, you know what? That's not really what we want. They could afford it all, but none of it was adding much value. So we started looking in a different direction. We asked, what if this extra capacity wasn't just for you? What if it could do something for someone else? That's when everything started to change because they began helping a grandchild financially, not just through an inheritance later on. They supported a ministry that meant a lot to them. And they started giving more intentionally, not because they felt obligated, but because it made them feel more connected. And that joy that came from that was completely different from the feeling they got from trying to spend on themselves. That's the part most people don't expect. When your income exceeds your needs, the decisions you're making aren't about survival, they're about alignment. So what do you value? What gives your life meaning? What kind of impact do you want to have? Because the truth is, more money doesn't simplify those questions, it honestly magnifies them. And if you haven't thought about what this next chapter is really for, no amount of wealth will make that decision easier. And this is where financial planning turns into something more than just strategy. This is where it becomes about purpose. And that's what we're going to explore next, because the last insight might be the most important of all. How to spend your money in a way that's not just smart, but deeply fulfilling. See, so far we've looked at how the 5 million couple and the $2.5 million couple face trade-offs, just different ones. And that contrast shows up again when it comes to giving and legacy planning. For the $2.5 million couple, giving is usually a bit more straightforward. Their margin is a little bit tighter, so they tend to give smaller amounts, and it's usually out of their annual cash flow. That might mean helping a child here or there, giving to a local charity, or maybe setting up a donor advised fund with a modest balance. Now for the $5 million couple though, that's where things get more complicated because now the giving conversation isn't just, can we give? It's how much, when, to whom, and how do we make sure it actually helps? And that's where the stress starts to creep in. See, one spouse might want to give big now while they can see the impact, while the other might want to hold off because they're worried about running out or about enabling bad behavior. I've had clients ask, if we gift $50,000 to each kid each year, will that spoil them? Should we give to charity now or leave a lump sum till later? And do we tell the kids how much we actually have? And do we treat them equally or just fairly? And these aren't just philosophical questions, they have real financial consequences. And the bigger the portfolio, the higher the stakes, because while the $5 million couple has more capacity to give, they also have more ways to get it wrong. And that's the part most people don't expect. They think more money will make giving easier, but in many cases, it just creates a longer list of options and a greater fear of choosing the wrong one. That's why intentional planning is so important, not just for taxes or for income, but for giving as well. Because when you have more to work with, your decisions have more weight. And in that sense, having 5 million doesn't just mean you can give more, it means your giving needs to be done with more purpose. So what actually changes when you retire with 5 million instead of 2.5? Yes, you've got more income to work with. You've got more choices. And to be honest, more complexity. But the core questions, well, they still remain the same. Do we have enough? Are we spending on the right things? Are we using our money the way we want to? And what I've seen is that more money doesn't answer those questions, it simply turns up the volume. That's why the people who retire well aren't just chasing a number, they've figured out what matters to them and they've built a plan around that. And if you're somewhere on that path, whether you've already hit your number or you're still not sure if it's enough, you'll want to see what happens next. Because what life actually looks like with 6 million, my business partner Anthony will see you over in that video right now.